What's up, everybody? Thanks for clicking this video. Thanks for tuning into my channel. My name is Simon Hill, Black American from Louisiana, coming to you live from Budapest, Hungary. It's May 21st, 2024, about 5:42 p.m. where I'm at right now. Shout out to my guy Avery Adams for the $20 super chat. It is much appreciated. I want everybody to know that if you donate to this channel, it's going towards helping pay for my college tuition. The tuition where I am going to school is about 2,400 euros per semester, which is much cheaper than it is in the US. But yeah, it definitely goes a long way. Anything you guys do to try to support my channel and try to support everything that I try to do here as well. I try to bring informative information. I try to be as relatable to the people as I can. I'll talk about anything, any topic under the sun. But yeah, looking forward to doing the movie reviews once my wife and her friend finally stop hanging out every single day. You know, she's visiting from out of town, so she gets to have, you know, her week off, her vacation from being in Simon World. So I hope y'all miss Acti, and I hope y'all look forward to having her come back very soon for movie reviews, live with Acti, all that sort of stuff. And yeah, shout out to Avery Adams. I have Red in the comment section. Red is not a black person, I assume. So I would ask you, Red, not to call me the N-word, all right? Do not call me the N-word, especially if you are not black. But generally, you guys don't hear me use that word all the time. Let's talk about something. We as black people generally have a mixed feeling when it comes to using the N-word, right? All right. So the thing is, a lot of white people like to say, "Oh, you know, I am a black Swedish man." Okay. Either way, Red, I would like to ask you this, Red. Are we niggas? I would like to ask you this, Red. Red, are we niggas? This is the real honest question now. You know what I mean? When we think about who we are as human beings, I'm sure, Red, you're a brother, you're a son to somebody. You probably have a job that you like or enjoy, some hobbies or something like that. Red, just by the way you're talking in the comment section, I pretty much know you're not black, because no black man would readily start continuing to hurl the N word at a black man who's trying to talk about the nuances of the N word. But if you want to be viewed as a nigga or treated as a nigga, I invite you to go to Mississippi and let's see how you enjoy being called a nigga by the white boys who will beat you over the head with batons and all that sort of stuff. Red, I highly doubt you are black, and it's a shame that so many people are that ignorant. But every time they show their ignorance online, it goes further to the point of this book we are reading today, Cyber Racism, White Supremacy Online, and the New Attacks on Civil Rights. This was written by this white woman named Jessie Daniels, who is an anti-racist activist, author, and educator, and I'm looking forward to finishing her book. We started the first part of the book yesterday. We read the prelude, the preface part, and we read the preface, chapter 1 and chapter 2. Now we're going into part 2 of her book, and we'll only be reading 2 chapters today. We're reading chapters 3 and 4, and hopefully we will finish up this book by Thursday. So looking forward to getting to the end and having some final thoughts about this topic. And yeah, uh, Avery Adams, you can talk to Red in the chat. You can go at him about the N word. You can handle that. I know you are more than capable of handling that. But I want to ask everybody this: when you look at me, do you see a man? Do you see an educator? Do you see a Muslim? Do you see a person who tries to be a good husband, or do you just see a nigga? Now, if you only see a nigga, then that says more about you than it does about me, right? I view myself as a nigga first, or at all, if that makes sense. All right. So let's go here to part 2, white supremacy in a global context. All right. So chapter 3, individual acts of white supremacy online. Let's start with the quote right here from Frederick Jameson: "The standardization of world culture with with local popular or traditional forms driven out or dumbed down to make way for American television, American music, food, clothes, and film has been seen by many as the very heart of globalization." Let's read that quote again. Very important. The standardization of world culture with local, popular, or traditional forms driven out or dumbed down to make way for American television, American music, food, clothes, and film has been seen by many as the very heart of globalization. Very true. I mean, if you ever have the opportunity to travel to different parts of the world, you notice very quickly that everybody's sort of watching the same things. They're all watching Friends on Netflix. They're all wearing Levi jeans. There's every McDonald's in every foreign country is always packed, and sometimes that's the bougie place to be. Americanization and globalization sort of go hand in hand because of America's dominance in popular culture. And this is a good and bad thing to some degree because America's exports, a lot of the times, can be viewed as positive, right? We like hip hop music, we like jazz, we like, the freedom of speech or certain cultural norms that America has created that I do think actually are valuable, right? Democracy and that sort of stuff, even if in America we don't live up to it. But I would say, there are other things that America exports that are horrible, like white supremacy, like anti blackness online, like horrible stereotypes about not only black people, but other groups of people. A lot of this stuff comes out from American media, and that really needs to be talked about. Okay. So, yeah, I wonder where she's going with this quote. So, in February 1998, Richard Machado, a 21-year-old Los Angeles man, was convicted of violating the civil rights of Asian students at the University of California, Irvine, after sending them threatening emails just over a year earlier. In September of 1996, Machado had sent a 9-line profanity riddled email message to 59 students he had identified as Asian by their name. The message said, in part, "I personally will make it my life's career to find and kill every one of you personally," and was signed Asian Hater, quote unquote. After being indicted in November 1996, Machado, then 19 years old, fled to Mexico to avoid prosecution. He was subsequently apprehended and spent a year in federal custody. In addition to receiving a fine and probation, Machado was sentenced to undergo psychiatric counseling with mandated participation in a racial tolerance program as a component of that counseling. Furthermore, he was ordered to neither enter the Irvine campuses nor attempt to contact any of the recipients of the threatening email messages. Very interesting that a Mexican man was filled with so much hatred for another group of people in America who are often viewed as othered, as often discriminated against. This is why I talk about white supremacy online, or white supremacy in general, or anti blackness in general, because it affects everybody. This story has nothing to do with black people, though I can pretty much assume Richard probably hated black people if you hate Asian people that much. You get what I'm saying? So it's very interesting. This man could have gone off to do horrible things. He could have walked into some Asian nail salon and tried to slaughter all the Vietnamese girls who were working there. He could have done something horrible later in his life. Thankfully, he was apprehended. Thankfully, the authorities stepped in. And we need those sorts of laws. We need that sort of protection in our society against these people who get so radicalized and turned up off of hating other groups of people. White supremacy is an evil sickness that infects the mind. It's a weird ideology that continues to permeate, evolve, and change over time. And it's even gotten into the minds of people who wouldn't even be able to identify as white supremacists. I'm pretty sure if Richard Machado walked into his local skinhead meeting or Klan meeting, he would promptly be kicked out or booted, if that makes sense. Uh, anyway, I'm going here to the next part. The case of Richard Machado illustrates a number of interesting points about globalization, individual acts of white supremacy, and the internet. In many ways, Machado's racialized crime was only possible because of globalization, both in terms of flows of people across national borders that brought him and the students he targeted together in Orange County, and also in terms of the kind of Americanization of world culture to which Frederick Jameson refers to in the epigraph. Clearly, Machado's email crime was only possible because of the internet. The combination of an increasingly homogenized global culture and the possibility of acts of individual white supremacy have implications of our understanding of race as well. At this point in the study, I examined published accounts of mainstream news sources about Machado's story to construct a case study. My two goals in this case study are: number one, to offer a preliminary exploration of how an individual, quite apart from any involvement in a white supremacist social movement organization, might be involved in individual acts of white supremacy, and two, to situate those acts within a broader social context in which globalization, the internet, and race are imbricated. To accomplish these goals, I analyzed this case thematically, looking at elements of globalization, the internet, and race. Whenever possible, I also include the victim stories, which are typically left out of the mainstream accounts. I explore this absence as well. Once again, it's very fascinating to hear about a presumably, I didn't look up Richard Machado, but you guys are welcome in Google to look up what Richard Machado looks like or what he's doing now. Whatever. Don't harass him online. Please don't harass him. But it's very likely he was a tan skinned, brown, Latino person, like, a lot of Mexicans are. I'm not trying to stereotype them, but if, Richard probably fits the mestizo category box. And he was so turned up on hatred for Asian people, he was sending long chain emails to these people. And listen, the thing is that's crazy about this now, Richard Machados are still out there. There are guys who are obviously Asian, obviously Latino, obviously of backgrounds that the white supremacists, the real white supremacists would say, you ain't one of us. They not like us. The white supremacists would see Richard Machado and say, they not like us. But he would still want to, crash out over their stupid ideas. Really crazy. Anyway, continuing here. Globalization. In understanding globalization, and in particular, global flows of people across national boundaries, we get a fuller view of what set Machado on a path toward the individual acts of online white supremacy. He committed from a computer lab on the UC Irvine campus in the late 1990s. Globalization is always local in its consequences, and for Southern Californians, one of the consequences of globalization has been a pattern of immigration and outmigration of Mexicans and Mexican Americans from Tijuana to San Diego, up through the agricultural Santa Maria Valley and into Northern California and as far north as Seattle. Published reports about Richard Machado's life indicate that his family migrated along a similar path, traveling from Mexico to Los Angeles. Machado, the youngest of 7 children and the first in his family to go to college, then continued this migration to Irvine, 40 miles east of Los Angeles. It's so crazy. I'm going to read this comment from Avery, but then I'm going to say something. He says, yeah, I like this read so far. I get to watch part 1 later. Hey, once again, guys, I'm really sorry about the audio on my microphone for part 1. I don't know what's happening with my microphones. I know I need to invest in a new microphone with all the, donations I get on this channel and stuff like that. I know it's a crime for me to still be using this, shitty microphone. But I'm definitely going to do that, probably do that next paycheck, get a new microphone and sound really good. I'm using my old computer here because on my MacBook, I can't stream with OBS the way I want to, but I hope, you're still able to, read and follow along with what I'm saying. But very interesting that Machado, his family came from Mexico, crossed the border to seek a new life. And then he ends up becoming a rabid racist online in one generation. In one generation, the Mexicans become rabid white supremacists, or at least this family did, or at least one person in this family did. This might be the only good argument I could ever hear from anybody about we need to kick the immigrants out. Because they're going to come here and continue to be anti-black racists like they are in their own country sometimes. Continuing here. Globalization also facilitated the growth of the University of California system, as well as the expansion of wealthy Orange County, where UC Irvine is located. While the growth of Orange County originally developed in the 1960s as a suburban appendage to Los Angeles, by the 1980s it had become an economic and cultural center with its own linkages to the global economy. And globalization is partly responsible for Machado's contact with Asian and Asian American fellow students. Orange County has seen the growth of an international Asian and Pacific Islander community and a large Asian American population. These communities were formed in the 1970s and 80s by individuals and families with enough personal capital to pursue higher education in the United States, and today are interlinked with other ethnically based communities in geographically dispersed locations within the global political economy. Many in this diaspora stay digitally connected to others in dispersed global locations via email, video chat, and online communities. The ethnic concentration of Asians and Pacific Islanders in Orange County is reflected in data from the U.S. Census. In 2000, approximately 29.8% of those living in Irvine were of Asian descent, compared to 10.9% for the rest of the state. That same year, the Latino population in Irvine was just 7.9% compared to 32.4% for California as a whole. Further, the fact that Machado, who is Mexican American, adopted racist elements of the dominant culture by targeting Asians and Asian Americans is not surprising given the historical legacy of white supremacy in California with its complex interplay of economic forces and racial attitudes that simultaneously structure and allocate group position. In the late 1990s, the racial fault lines in California were perhaps most pronounced in higher education, as the University of California system barred the use of race and gender as admissions factors. And as a result, the enrollment of Latino students at the university's most selective campuses plummeted. Indeed, between 1997 and 1998, at one UC campus, admissions of Latinos dropped by 43%. UC's policy shift significantly affected Machado, according to published reports, who sent threatening emails to the campus newspaper staff because he was upset that the paper supported the policies. While globalization and state policies have worked together to provide opportunities for some, they have simultaneously excluded others, and Machado saw himself among those pushed out by such policies. All right, so this is very interesting, and let's break down this paragraph so far. And I really like how this chapter is opening up not talking about black people, to make this point more even prescient, more relevant to all of you out there who are not black or who really despise black people or who don't care about anti-blackness. They are talking about here in this situation, there is a lot of Latinos and a lot of Asians living in California because of the location where it's at, right? Tijuana, San Diego, right next door. A lot of Asians are going to come to the place that's nearest to where they come from. So across the Pacific, land in California, the push and pull factors of the California's economy makes it an attractive place for immigrants, right? So a lot of immigrants are coming in, but in California at the time they didn't have affirmative action, right? So the Latinos were not getting into universities anymore, right? A lot of Latinos like to say, we want to come to America and earn everything we get. We want to come to America and pull ourselves up by our bootstraps. But then when they don't get into university, they start blaming the Asians and then become hella racist and then send threatening emails to the Asian students. Very, very interesting how they're talking about this. Machado was radicalized because of the lack of social safety net or upward mobility that's available for a lot of minorities in America because of the disadvantaged position that we find ourselves in. So he becomes radicalized that way. Very, very interesting story. I like that. So the fact that Machado and the Asian American students were on the same campus in the UC system was at least partially due to globalization. What each student faced, though it is unlikely that Machado recognized his commonality with his victims' causes, was the pressure of assimilation into the dominant white American culture. Jameson articulates the standardization of world culture as making way for American culture and cultural products and standards, which gets played out on college campuses and can be agonizing for US born minority and foreign born students who are pressured to assimilate or suffer discrimination. The racial and ethnic identities of Machado, Mexican American, and the students he targeted, Asian and Asian American, were in part constructed by these global flows of people across national borders. The global trend toward creating sameness from diverse cultures has repercussions within the United States as well, as a diverse range of people with different religions, languages, and cultural histories are homogenized by the dominant culture and lumped into broad categories like Asian, Asian American, and Mexican American, descriptives devoid of meaning outside of an American context. However, these were not the relevant aspects of globalization that earned Machado headlines. I just want to push back a bit against this idea that, it's because I feel like she's alluding to the idea that maybe it's a bit natural for multicultural or multiracial societies to have racism as a output, right? And I always have to push back against that because we have to remember that white supremacy at least is unnatural, and racism, I would argue, is also a bit unnatural as well. I'm still wrestling with that idea. Is racism a natural thing that would occur when there are large groups of people living in multi ethnic or multiracial societies? It's something that I really don't have the answer for. But I would say white supremacy in and of itself is unnatural, right? Machado didn't move to America and start hating white people, right? He came to America and started hating on Asian people, a group of people that the dominant society, the white supremacist society of America, has for a long time hated on. So this Mexican American man comes to America and starts embracing white supremacy to some degree by shitting on, to put to put it bluntly, another group of people to make himself feel better, and also because he didn't get into the university he wanted. But is this a natural occurrence? I would say no. I would say no. Racism in and of itself is not natural. That's my gut reaction to that. And that's what I kind of want to believe, because we have to believe idealistically that this unnatural thing, the concept of race, the concept of racism, these social constructs can be destroyed eventually. That's what I would say. That's my response to that. But I don't know. I would like to know what y'all think about that. So, the internet. Machado's crime was noteworthy, or sorry, Machado's crime was newsworthy because he used the internet to send threatening hate messages. As such, there were unique technological features to this crime. First, Machado created an email address using an alias. This is easy to do, and many people who are online have multiple aliases that they use for separate email accounts as a way of managing different sets of relationships. For example, a personal email with the user ID hot1 at myemail.com versus a work related email with the user ID jsmith at myworkspace.com. Such online aliases are easy to create, easy to discard, and most of the time innocuous. In Machado's case, the fact that he used an alias meant that his identity could remain anonymous, at least initially, thus allowing him to launch an attack via email hidden behind a fictitious online identity. Second, in order to locate the students he wanted to target, Machado checked usernames in a searchable database of enrolled students on the UC Irvine network and looked for names that sounded Asian to him. Here, race is part of a routine technological artifact of a college database, which Machado was able to effectively use as a racial filter. While I have no doubt that the campus's cyber infrastructure was created by well meaning software engineers and information architects who gave no thought to race as they coded the software to run their searchable database, that race can be identifiable or at least intimated means that it is like a ghost in the machine, operating in unseen ways. Machado's using the searchable database as a racial identifier is consistent with the way race is built into cyber infrastructure in other ways. Recall Nakamura's example of the drop down menu with a list of possible racial identities from which to choose. So that's in reference to what we read yesterday. Basically online, we are able to pick and choose sort of our identity. There are people online who pretend to be black, people who pretend to be whites, and people who pretend to be women or men and that sort of stuff. So yeah, our identities online are flexible if we are not showing our face to some degree, right? And in this case, the ghost in the shell, the ghost in the machine, is that this guy was able to find the Asians he wanted to target. This Mexican American man was looking for the Asians he wanted to target, and because the coders, the people who were programming the machines, didn't think about, well, maybe we should make race something that is not identifiable, or they didn't even consider that at all, that allowed somebody to do the targeted attack on the Asians or the people, whoever he wanted to target, right? Which could happen again, right? Very, very interesting. All right, so third, Machado used the CC function of an email program to send his hateful messages to multiple users. As such, the internet worked as a force multiplier of hate speech. Rather than passing a note in class to a student he identified as Asian, Machado could easily send one message to as many Asian students as he could identify at once. And because of the real time sending and receipts of email messages on the internet, after sending the first email, Machado sat back and waited for a typewritten response, able to gauge the reaction to his poison pen letter. Thanks to the internet's unique capabilities, when no reply from his victims was immediately forthcoming, Machado resent the original racist email message to the same list of recipients. This man was working overtime. He literally had too much time on his hands. Thank you, Avery. Avery said this. He had too much time on his hands or too much hate in his heart. But I can see how it started for him. It's crazy. It's really crazy. He really was working overtime. It was like a second job to be racist, which is honestly, when you think about it, what would motivate somebody to be, for example, on Twitter, posting constantly racist memes? Now, we have to discard the Russian bots, and we know that the Russians and other government organizations have literal people on payroll or AI bots out there just spamming racism all day or other hateful things or divisive things, right? And America does it too. It's not just Russia. But what would make a normal person, right? A quote unquote normal person sit down all day and try to do these things? They have to be motivated by something. A lot of it might be mental illness, but it has to be a motivation. And that's why I always argue that white supremacy is not some outlier, it's an ideology. It is no different than Islamic jihadism. If somebody is a young Muslim man, they sometimes are likely, if they are very religious and very pious, they're very likely to get caught up into that sort of stuff, right? Not all young Muslim men, but a lot of them are. The same thing applies for a lot of young white men, a lot of non white men, right? Even young black men can get caught up in promoting white supremacist ideas online because it is an ideology, it is a belief system. And people, when they're motivated by a belief system, are willing to do anything for it, right? Give their time, money, sometimes even life for it. Continuing here. Race and the white racial frame. The fact that Machado is Mexican American and the students he targeted were Asian and Asian American suggests just how race and racial identity figure into white supremacy online. Machado was not, according to published accounts, involved in an organized white supremacist group, nor was he known to have visited white supremacist sites online. Yet the language of his email was clearly hate speech. One explanation for Machado's action is that no less than most other people in the United States, he had adopted the dominant white racial frame. Part of what is useful about this theoretical framework is that it situates racist actions within a larger system of racial oppression rather than in either individual identity, not only whites adopt the white racial frame, or individual pathology of racial prejudice tied to a personality disorder. But so that literally just speaks about what I was talking about earlier. Part of what is useful about this theoretical framework, the white racial frame, what the white racial frame basically means is like seeing the world through a white lens or through the Americanized white lens that our dominant society sort of perpetrates, right? So part of what is useful about this theoretical framework is that it situates racist actions within a larger system of racial oppression rather than either individual identity, not only whites adopt the white racial frame, or individual pathology or racial prejudice tied to a personality disorder. So they're saying not only white people can adopt the white racial frame, everybody can adopt it. And also, not only crazy people do it, not only people who are outliers or outcasts. It literally, quotes what I said, but whatever. Maybe I was just reading ahead and whatever. You get the idea. Not only crazy people are a part of this type of movement. Anyway, Machado need not have been white to send the racist emails, nor did he necessarily need to be mentally ill to have sent the emails. And there is no indication from the published accounts that he was. Instead, he was merely all he sorry. Instead, he merely needed to grow up in the United States, which he did, and adapt to the dominant culture's white racial frame. By targeting Asian and Asian American students, Machado was simply echoing this frame. Machado adopted this frame when he selected his targets from a list of names that sound homogeneously Asian to him. Such a strategy is ultimately a racist one that dehumanizes and de individualizes people from a diverse range of cultures and ethnic backgrounds in the United States. The racial or ethnic identity Asian does not distinguish people from nations as diverse as China, Japan, and Korea. Nations that have a markedly different cultural, historical, and political viewpoint, and in each case have engaged in protracted battles with one another. That Machado was unable to that Machado was unable or unwilling to differentiate between his fellow students further evidences his adoption of the white racial frame. Very interesting. I really like that quote right here. I really like this page right here, and this chapter is killing it right now. Let's continue here. So while Machado, as a Mexican American, represents a somewhat anomalous case of an individual engaging in acts of cyber racism, it is also possible that he could have found a welcoming online community at stormfront.org, the home of white pride worldwide, quote unquote. As I discussed at some length in chapter 5, the boundaries of whiteness are quite flexible and can expand to include individuals that might, in another context, be considered non white. For example, the participant at Stormfront, who goes by the name Diablo Blanco 14, describes himself as a Southern Italian from a pan-Aryan neighborhood, quote unquote, in Brooklyn, where he grew up with neighbors from a variety of white ethnic identities, including white Hispanics, quote unquote. This participant describes his choice of a Spanish screen name by saying that he wants to use a Med language to express white Med pride, a rhetorical strategy for demarcating Mediterranean peoples as white, when historically within the United States they have been considered non white. Whether or not Machado self consciously identified as white or even as white Hispanic remains an open question. What seems clear from his email attack on Asian and Asian American students is that he saw them as explicitly non white. And in this way, Machado adopted one of the more quotidian aspects of the white racial frame in identifying a racial other. And by quotidian, I think they mean just otherizing, right? Though I will look this word up. Give me a second here. Shout out to everybody who is listening right now. Quotidian. Let's look up the definition of quotidian. Of or occurring every day, daily. Okay. So he adopted the more everyday aspects of the white racial frame and identifying racial order, basically by saying they are definitely not white. Asians are not white. Blacks are not white. So with that said, we can pretty much assume, our Mexican American friend Machado who came to America with a dollar and a dream with his family, was adopting the larger or the larger American subculture. The American subculture of active white supremacists. They don't know if he was on Stormfront or if he went on 4chan, but it's pretty likely that if he did go on those websites, he would have found a community of other people, the whites who are considered swarthy whites. And if you've been on 4chan, you know this, that among white people, they debate all the time who's really white and who's not. And the whites from Italy, Greece, Portugal, and especially the whites from Latin America have a big inferiority complex and are always trying to overcompensate for the whiteness that they apparently lack, which is why a lot of them go out of their way to be uh, more proud or brazen white supremacists, right? Like Enrique Tarrio from the Proud Boys, right? Continuing here. So Avery Adams said in the chat, this is true. Anybody can adopt this way if you can get caught up into a belief because your perspective can be altered. People need to hold themselves accountable to see both sides, then decide. This is the thing though. I would argue that there is no both sides to racial realism, right? Online right now, on Twitter, on YouTube, on Instagram, there are people who put out content all day saying that black people are naturally less intelligent. There are people who put out content that say black people are more prone to crime. There are people who put out there in their content that black women are more likely to carry venereal diseases. Yes, these are literal things that the white supremacists say. There's no both sides to that. There is no both sides, right? Like these people are actively just spreading misinformation and propaganda. And the worst thing is that it's harmful to a whole new generation, right? The older folks said, by the time our grandparents die and by the time that we die, racism will be gone because all the old people who believed in it will be gone and long gone, right? But we're still dealing with the same thing today. We're still dealing with police who are my age who are shooting young black men in the back. We are dealing with today, young white men who are marching with neo Nazis. We're dealing with young white men who are walking into supermarkets and spraying the whole place just because it's full of Hispanics or black people, right? So I would say there's no two sides to this thing, right? Of course, there are nuances in some conversation, but when it comes to racism against other people, when it comes to white supremacist views, there is no two sides, I would say. Nothing that they say is based in truth. You get what I'm saying? All right, gonna read this here from Avery, then I'm gonna jump to the next paragraph. So, but the same thing can be said about all ethnic groups. Like anything you say about one group can be said about your group, or you actually look and not ignore it. If you, all right, I'm a bit confused, but the same can be said of, yeah, that's the thing, right? Like the white supremacists will say to us, you people are naturally unintelligent. This is what they still believe. This is what they wholeheartedly believe. You people are naturally unintelligent. But then we can look at them and point out a bunch of stupid white people. We can point out a bunch of stupid white people, but then they would argue, no, statistically, you people are less inclined to be intelligent. All right. So We that is just not true. Like there is no scientific study that has validated this belief to the millionth time. No, it has not passed peer review. There is people are naturally less intelligent than white people, but this is what is spread out online, right? And so, I don't know exactly what you're trying to get at. This is I'm not exactly sure what you're trying to get at here, but I'm just saying this. There are some things that can be debated, right? Like I don't know, whether you could debate whether police wearing body cams is a good, right? You could debate whether reparations is a good way to compensate for the wrongs done for slavery or Jim Crow. Sure, we could debate that, but we're not debating the idea that black people are less intelligent. We're not debating the idea that Jews are naturally wicked people. The weird stuff that the white supremacists say. All right. All right. Yeah, Avery, you sort of set it up best. Everybody is the same. We just want to look for differences that don't exist. I would argue it's not we. It's not we, as in the victims of white supremacy. The victims of white supremacy are not looking for differences. The white supremacists are constantly looking for differences. We are the ones who are constantly trying to unify the world. I want the same, even for the white guy who's going to come into my comment section later and call me the N word and all sort of stuff like that. I want the same thing for him. I want his kids to be able to go to university for free. I want his kids and him and his wife to be able to go to any hospital in America and get the best medical treatment for free. You get what I'm saying? Like, I want the same thing for the same white man who's going to attack me later or threaten my life just because I called his country the most racist place I've ever been. You get what I'm saying? So, yeah, it's not us. It's not us. But I'll continue here. Emails that wound. So, placing the victim story at the center of the analysis of hate speech, as critical race theorists suggest, is difficult because of the way this story and others like it are reported in the mainstream news. This is especially so in this case of hate speech via email because the press accounts mainly leave out the perspective of those who are the targets of hate speech. That is, the UC Irvine students who received Machado's email messages. For the most part, mainstream press accounts in this instance were written from within the white racial frame and left out the systemic pattern of virulent anti-Asian racism on the UC campus. At the time of Machado's attacks, Asian students on at least 4 UC campuses have been the targets of virulent anti-Asian telephone calls, graffiti, and email. Although many Asian American victims of racism keep such hostility to themselves, a handful of UC students organized to bring the harassment of Asian American students to the attention of administrators. Research indicates that hate crimes exact an especially heavy toll on the victims. And while there is less research that examines internet hate crimes, we can infer, based on other research about the impact of hate crimes, including hate crimes that are verbal and not physical, that these crimes committed online still negatively impact other people's lives. In the absence of empirical research or press accounts, we can only speculate that these hate messages, sent anonymously and multiple times via email, have created a greater sense of fear and violation for the recipients than if Machado had passed a note in class with a similar message. Yes, yes, yes. It's absolutely true that people like to say sticks and stones might break your bones, but words should never hurt you. All that sort of stuff, right? But it's very true. Like if you've ever received death threats, like I have, if you've ever had people violently call you out of your name and had the worst racial slurs hurled at you from people that you don't know and you don't know where they come from and they could be from anywhere. And when you look on YouTube and you see that you've gotten 5,000 views in an hour, you don't know who these people are. You don't know how they might be able to find you or know you or anything like that. Yeah, it does, get on your mind and it does make you a bit antsy or nervous. There is not one day of my life that I don't think about dying. I asked Acti this yesterday. I asked Acti, what would you do if I was killed by the police? And we had some banter about it, but it was a real conversation as well. Because, I'm not trying to make myself seem like Malcolm X or Martin Luther King, but I know that I make myself a target by speaking up for our people, speaking up for black people, but also speaking up for all of humanity by doing this type of work, right? And a lot of people, black people, Asian people, Hispanic people, and some white people online face racism that is not okay, right? These words stick with you. It bothers you. I started off the live stream yesterday talking about why racism online is an issue. Some people will just say, oh, turn off the cell phone. Oh, go touch grass. The internet is a public square. It's a public place. We need it to actually do most of the things that we need to do online. People are paying bills online, communicating with their family online, staying interconnected with friends that they, knew from university or from high school or elementary, right, online. People should have the right to be in the public square, the world public square, which is the internet, and not be racially harassed, right? If you think it's okay for somebody to get called the N word online, you would then also have to say it's okay for somebody to get called the N word in the street, right? No, that is not okay. But if you think that's so, then go ahead. All right. Continuing here. Continuing here. All right. By the way, shout out to Culturalist Theory. I just got the PayPal notification that the new episode I wrote for Boosie, yes, the Boosie Badass episode is coming to Culturalist Theory. I just spent about 2 weeks listening to every single Boosie Badass album and writing about it. So y'all stay tuned for Culturalist Theory and check that out. Okay. I just had to drop that little information right there. Anyway, let's continue. So, the fact that Machado was convicted of a hate crime involving the internet reveals some features of the law and the internet in the United States. Within the states, the only time white supremacy online loses its First Amendment speech protection is when it is joined with conduct that threatens, harasses, or incites illegality. Yet the Machado case suggests that the law is not evenly applied to all people in the United States. The fact that the only individual prosecuted so far for white supremacy online is Mexican American is consistent with the racialized bent of the American criminal justice system, in which minority men are viewed as inherently suspect and differentially arrested, prosecuted, and incarcerated. The fact Machado's victims were Asian and Asian American, often stereotyped as model minorities, and unlikely to name this harassment as part of systemic discrimination, made it easy for the whole outside made it for those outside sorry it made it easy for those outside the case to ignore the larger context of white supremacy. While Machado's conviction may seem like a triumph for the critical race perspective that places victims' accounts at the center of the analysis, on closer inspection it is, in fact, one of the few places that critical race theory and more absolutist interpretations of the First Amendment overlap, even in the very limited number of instances in which white supremacy online does not constitute legally protected speech in the United States. The aggressive prosecution of such cases seems to rely on racialized notions of who is the suspect. There seems to be a disturbing difference between the class of citizen held suspect of such crime and the class of citizen whose speech is protected. Basically, what she's saying here is that Machado got convicted of harassing these Asians online under a hate crime law, basically because he was Latino, which is the biggest irony, right? A lot of white people get away, or a lot of white supremacists online, or a lot of people who purport to be white supremacists online, uh, get away with the sort of harassment that Machado does because the enforcement isn't aggressive, even if they broke the law to the T. Right? Even if they broke the law by the very letter, by the very definition. But Machado got the most aggressive type of treatment in the punishment of this law, or the enforcement of this law, because of his Hispanic background. Right? Think about that. Think about that. That's like the most ironic thing. It's like when you hear about a police shooting a black man, and then you're like, oh wow, he got arrested very quickly. And then you look at the cop's picture and you realize the cop is black. You get what I'm saying? It's like one of those things. So that's it's pretty funny. It's pretty ironic. Once again, this man's life was probably destroyed. Like Machado, the little Mexican man, the little Mexican Nazi, probably had a very hard time finding a job after, because he's a convicted felon with a hate crime in California. Probably very hard for him to find a job unless his Mexican homies hooked him up. He probably didn't make all the money he could. He definitely got kicked out of Irvine. We read that earlier. So his family came to America trying to get the American dream. And this guy fell into America's biggest trap, like white supremacy, a system, an ideology that basically eats its own, right? And his life was somewhat ruined, though I don't know what Machado is doing now. This was well over 25 years ago, so who knows what he's doing now. But still, the point remains, none of that had to happen. Him harassing Asian students for no reason was really stupid and dumb. All right. Uh, Avery Adams says, like, they picked him out of the bunch. You can't find a better crash dummy than a a brown person who wants to be a foot soldier for white supremacy. You will never find a better crash dummy than that. You put a battery in the back of any person that's white adjacent and tell them that they could have all the benefits of white supremacy. They will do anything. They will go kamikaze for it. I'm telling you. Anyway, conclusion: the Machado case represents an individual act of cyber racism and is significant for several reasons. First, it underscores the acts of cyber racism are not all committed by people involved in organized white supremacist groups. Indeed, just as the majority of hate crimes are committed by people who are not affiliated with any form of organized racism, it may be that subsequent empirical investigations into cyber racism reveal that the majority of these types of acts are committed by individuals who are not affiliated with any organization. The case study method is limited by its inability to address such a conclusion based on these limited data. This case study also illustrates a unique example of legal precedence. Machado remains the only person convicted of an internet hate crime in the United States. Let's repeat: we do have laws in America. For any of you crazy white supremacists who want to jump online, I will start trying to prosecute y'all. I'm a snitch. I'm a snitch. I never once claimed to be a street guy. I never once claimed to be Mr. Big Bad and Gangster. I do got these hands, but now that I know that there's a law out there to prosecute internet hate crimes, I just might start calling the feds. I might turn into Takashi 69. I might be on Twitter all day working for the FBI. They say Diddy is a fed. I might be the I might be like a fed out here online trying to report all you racists. I'm gonna blow up the FBI's hotline trying to call y'all up, man. I'm gonna be like Takashi in this thing, for real. Be like Gunner. Yeah, it was him. I'm gonna be on the stand pointing at all you. For real, for real. Anyway, the decision to prosecute Machado is consistent with current jurisprudence, which limits First Amendment protection of speech when it is jointed with conduct that threatens, harasses, or incites illegality. However, the fact that the only person ever convicted of such a crime is a man of Mexican American ancestry reflects the racism of the criminal justice system and the fact that it is overwhelmingly minority men who are regarded as suspects. I would just argue against that. Like, if she's going to write that in the text, I would say that she should have given an example of a white guy who did the same thing as Machado, but got away with it or got a slap on the wrist. That's the only thing, because I agree with her. I agree that it is more than likely. I would bet my life on it that there was a white guy out there who did the same thing as Machado. The people he were harassing complained about it and nothing happened to him. I'm more than certain. But it would have been good to give proof or evidence of that. You get what I'm saying? That's all. But continuing here. The Machado case study also highlights the interconnectedness of globalization, the internet, and race. His crime was possibly precisely because of two realities of the modern era: the global flows of people across borders and the internet. Globalized migrations across national boundaries are partly responsible for landing Machado and his chosen victims at the same campus in Orange County, and are part of what systematically set him at disadvantage relative to his fellow students. Rather than fostering tolerance, this multicultural reality, in the context of an intense pressure to conform and succeed in an Americanized, homogenous global culture, negatively affected both Machado and the Asian and Asian American students on campus. This individual act both retains many elements of the previous era of white supremacy, for example, racist messages of hate, alongside some new features of the digital era. For example, targets selected by usernames, multiple messages sent from one to many over a short period of time. The way that Machado was ultimately caught suggests how globalization and the internet might combat online white supremacy. Upon receiving the racist hate emails, several students responded with emails of their own to the Office of Academic Computing, or OAC. The staff at the OAC was able to identify Machado as the sender by tracing the emails he sent using SMTP, Simple Mail Transfer Protocol. Then they identified the lab and located the individual computer from which the message was being sent. When staffers went to the terminal, they found Machado still sitting there and asked him to leave. What a dumbass. What a dumbass. People have been doing dumb internet crimes before every rapper was, live streaming their drive-bys. Like, this is insane. Like, how stupid are you? You're sending these emails from like a public library with cameras. I'm sure there were cameras back in like 1997. What a dumbass. What a dumbass. This is really bad. Don't Instagram your crimes, everybody. Anyway, then they identified the lab and located the individual computer from which the messages were being sent. When staffers went to the terminal, they found Machado still sitting there and asked him to leave. Surveillance cameras in the computer lab later confirmed that Machado was in fact the author of the threatening email messages. Part of what this technological hate crime busting story suggests is that there is the means to address similar individual acts of white supremacy where there is the will to do so. So this is the thing, like, we have the ability, we have the power to prosecute people for hate crimes online, harassing people, threatening people, all that sort of stuff because of their ethnic, racial background, the color of their skin, whatever, right? We have the ability to do that, but we can only do that in America when the person is Mexican. You got to be this brown to be prosecuted. It's pretty funny. That's crazy. But remember, guys, this book was written in 2009, so there might have been more prosecutions. But I am sure it is not enough prosecutions for this crime, right? So the individual act of cyber racism also illustrates how certain minorities might choose to embrace the dominant white racial frame instead of choosing an oppositional alternative epistemology. This has important implications for understanding both epistemology and how more extremist expressions of white supremacy are connected to the banal, everyday expressions of white identity. While Machado could have chosen to interpret his experiences and struggles in a way that aligned him with Asian and Asian American students, he instead adopted the white racial frame and viewed them as racial others. Adopting this white racial frame led to the production of a particular kind of knowledge, that is, seeing these students as others. If he had adopted an alternative epistemology in which he critically evaluated his own social position and that of his fellow students within the context of globalization, Machado might have been less inclined to send those threatening emails. If Machado had adopted an epistemology that helped him clearly see the way that globalization relies on racism and racial inequality to operate smoothly, then that would have surely produced a different kind of knowledge about his fellow students. So basically, what she's trying to say here is that Machado, instead of doing the hard work of looking inside himself and having a critical eye on society, like thinking to himself, okay, I am a person of Mexican American descent, and these are, thousands of people at my school who are coming from various Asian countries in a nation that is not our own. Why is that? Is it because maybe during the Mexican American War, when America was trying to preserve slavery in the southwestern parts of the United States, they went to war with Mexico so they could basically keep their slaves? The Americans wanted to keep their slaves and also take the land of the Mexicans when they knew that there was so much gold in Colorado, Nevada, and California and that sort of stuff? Or is it the fact also that, the colonial powers like Britain literally sold drugs to the Chinese, forced them to take opium for a century, stole a century of economic progress and growth from them, therefore causing many Chinese to flee their nation? Or America committing a war crime by dropping 2 atomic bombs on Japan, causing Japan to go through many years of economic despair, causing many Japanese to flee to America? And so we're all in this same boat together in this nation that sort of destroyed our home nations and made us now subjects here in a white supremacist system where we're now forced to change our names from Juan to John and from Kim Sun to John Kim or something like that, right? They, instead of actually looking at that, he just said, "Nah, I just want to hate Asian people." Because this is the thing: a lot of the white supremacists, a lot of the racists are just lazy. They are too lazy to understand that the world we live in is a construct, is a consequence of the colonial era. It's a consequence of so many events that have happened over time that have disadvantaged people that look like us. And instead of actually having that critical eye to say, let's unify to fight against the forces that are still sort of upholding the systems that were created from that colonial structure or those colonial structures, let's actually just hate each other, which is ridiculous, right? All right. Anyway, I'm just going to continue here. While Machado acted individually and without any known affiliation to a white supremacist group offline or online, in order for us to understand white supremacy online more fully, we must move beyond the analysis of individual acts of white supremacy to examine organized white supremacist social movement organizations. Placing both the Machado case and white supremacist social movements within a global context, I turn next to the work of Manuel Castells, a leading figure in the sociology of globalization and the internet. So that's the end of chapter 2. I hope y'all enjoyed that. We're going to jump now to, sorry, not chapter 2. That was the end of chapter 3. Now we're jumping to chapter 4. This will be our last chapter for today. Remember, only 2 chapters per day. Go watch the previous episode. Sorry, the microphone is bad, but I hope y'all enjoy it and I hope it's informative. Let's go to chapter 4, white supremacist social movements online and in a global context. Let's go to the epigraph right here. I just learned that word when I started reading this book. Social movements in the information age are essentially mobilized around cultural values. The struggle to change the codes of meaning in the institutions and practices of the society is the essential context in the process of social change in the new historical context. Movements to seize the power of the minds, not state power. Let's repeat that. Let's repeat that because that's a lot to grasp. Social movements in the information age are essentially mobilized around cultural values. The struggle to change the codes of meaning in the institutions and practice of the society is the essential struggle in the process of social change in the new historical context. Movements to seize the powers of the minds, not state power. Basically, that's why this is a summation of the culture war, I would assume. That's my interpretation of that. Right now, a lot of people are fighting not for political office, right? Of course, you have career politicians or people who want to start a career in politics, but you have people who are basically staking their whole career on getting the largest following online, having the largest subscriber base, having the most followers on Instagram or Twitter and something like that, and then pushing out their view of the world. And I am no different to some degree. I want my audience to be bigger. I want more people to listen and learn and read with me and stuff like that. And I would like to influence some people to change their mindset about how they view black people and also how they view other people and the white supremacist structure of this world that we live in. I would like to do that, right? So I think that's what Manuel Castells is trying to get at here, that people are now fighting for the ability to control minds and influence minds online, right? And that's the part of many social movements. It's all cultural. All right, continuing here. The internet enables social movements to cross national boundaries in ways simply not possible in any previous era. In this new global era, the existence of online white supremacist social movements has been scrutinized from 3 distinct angles. First, scholars such as Manuel Castells have examined how racial identity and globalization are connected in online social movements. Second, others express concern about whether such social movements online threaten the broader political landscape, endangering the public sphere and democratic society. And third, mainstream press accounts and certain scholars have voiced concern that white supremacists with an online presence are recruiting. Yet the reality of white supremacist movements online, I posit, is more complex than any of these perspectives suggest. A good place to begin my explanation is with a discussion of race, globalization, and identity. So, translocal whiteness, shaping online white identity through global networked social movements. As Castells indicates in the epigraph opening this chapter, social movements in the digital era are centered on cultural values. For the most part, analyses of social movements and the internet have concentrated heavily on progressive and left leaning movements, while there has been far less attention given those of the far right. See, once again, this book is showing its age because I would say the right wing online right now is having a renaissance. They got Twitter, they have a big presence on YouTube. They got their Ben Shapiro's and their Steven Crowders and their Fox News online, and then their millions of minions who retweet their stuff. So yeah, at the beginning, the internet was very left wing. I remember the early days of the internet. I remember I'm so old, guys. I am so old. I remember when Alex Jones was considered left wing, right? When Alex Jones was doing interviews with Immortal Technique and criticizing the war in Iraq and Afghanistan and stuff like that, and bashing on Republicans and warmongers who were the conservatives in the government during the Bush era. I remember all of that. My old ass remembers all of that. People want to act like that's distant history now. Nobody wants to recall those eras of the internet when it was very left wing. Like, I remember when Bitcoin first dropped, right? And it wasn't tied to like the crypto bros right now who are all libertarian and they want to, dismantle every sort of like, you know, institution in society. I remember the early internet. The internet just started now becoming right wing, but I would say the internet is mostly right wing right now, in my opinion, right? Mostly right wing. Continuing here, though, I'm going to continue. Let me stop ranting about how old I am. All right. So I'm going to start over with this sentence. For the most part, analyses of social movements and the internet have concentrated heavily on progressive and left leaning movements, while there has been far less attention given those on the far right. Sorry, I misinterpreted that sentence. They're saying the analyses, the studies on the internet have focused on the left, right? But I think they might have focused more on left wing, activism online because it was just a lot more prevalent, right? The internet was new, so a lot of younger people are on it. A lot of younger people tend to be more left wing, etc., stuff like that. All right, continuing here. So, in the minority, Castells chose to write about the internet and both progressive movements, for example, feminism and environmentalism, and far right social movements. Thus, Castells' voice is central to any discussion of white supremacist social movements on the internet. Gonna jump into the comments right here. Avery says, I don't remember that. I was in middle school. See, I hate showing my age, man. Thank God I don't look 33. I hope I don't look 33. You get what I'm saying? Sorry, man. Actie's texting me. I hope she's okay. I'm almost finished with my stream, dear. I'm almost finished with my stream. Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you, dear. All right. Let me continue. So, sociologist Anthony Giddens has favorably compared Castell's three-volume Information Age, Economy, Society, and Culture to Max Weber's classic Economy and Society. Originally published in 1996, Castell's collective work presciently anticipated the enormous impact of the internet and globalization on everyday life. Given that The Power of Identity, Volume 2, addresses social movements in the information age and specifically refers to the patriot movement in the network society, Castell's work is particularly relevant to this discussion. His conceptualization he conceptualizes globalization and identity formation as conflicting trends, a point similar to that made in Benjamin Barber's Jihad versus McWorld. In two possible political futures, both bleak, neither democratic, Barber envisions McWorld as a commercialized, homogenized, depoliticized, and bureaucratized future, while Jihad is parochial, tribal, and factious. For both Castells and Barber, globalization is allied with tolerance, pluralism, and cosmopolitanism, whereas identity is implicated in racism, tribalism, and ethnic identities. In The Power of Identity, Castells explicitly grapples with white supremacy, globalization, and the internet in a segment he titles Up in Arms Against the New World Order, the American Militia, and the Patriot Movement in the 1990s. The section's primary source is the Southern Poverty Law Center's Klan Watch / Militia Task Force from 1996, which today the SPLC publishes online and in print as the Intelligence Report. Similarly, informing Castell's work is Ken Stern's 1996 A Force Upon the Plain, which discusses the American militia movement. These two sources buttress Castell's claim: one, that white supremacy is an extreme libertarian trend that identifies the federal government as a primary enemy. No, 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 no. No, 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 no. Yeah, that's big wrong. That's big wrong. That it perceives the New World Order, i.e., globalization, to be a greater threat still. That the movement features a backlash against feminism, gays, and racial or ethnic minorities. And four, that it promotes an intolerant affirmation of the superiority of Christian values. Castell's larger point here is that along with the Japanese Aum Shinrikyo, the cult responsible for the 1995 sarin gas attacks in the Tokyo subway, the Patriot movement is reactive, reflexively resisting globalization. As such, he considers the movement to be a rebellion against the more cosmopolitan strains of globalization, quite similar to Barber's Jihad, which opposes McWorld. I just want to summarize that, at least my understanding of that, because one thing I understand is that a lot of people might get lost in this text, and hell, I might get lost in it too. But this is my understanding, right? So this guy, Castells, wrote a big, important book called Information Age, Economy, Society, and Culture. And it's considered like, you know, now a sacred text, or at least a very important text in the field of sociology, right? And his view is that the world is moving towards either two things, like basically tribalism, where people are like our nation states, our identity, our culture, or more globalism, where people are more homogenized, and because of the homogenization, there's also a lot of Americanization in that as well. And then when he talks about the homogenization of the world, when he thinks about the trends that will flow throughout the world, he views white supremacy, that ideology, as something more, far off, not very relevant. Uh, you know, he misdiagnoses it as just a movement about fighting the federal government, when really it's an ideology that is just about more than war, right? Like the jihadis claim that they want to start the caliphate, right? An Islamic extremist wants to say like, okay, I'm going to fight for the caliphate, but really that they know that the caliphate is very much not likely in their lifetime, which is why they're most likely going to blow themselves up for it, right? The people who are fighting for white supremacy, the people who walk into the supermarkets and slaughter 10 black people, the people that walk into a church and shoot 9 black people, the people that walk into a mosque and kill 25 Muslims, these people know that they're not going to help create the white supremacist utopia that they envision, right? What they're really just doing is being a part of that death cult. White supremacy is a death cult. It's a sick ideology that really has no plans to govern, no plans to lead, no hope or vision for the future. But if you join the internet as a part of globalization, you might come off with this, belief that, okay, the white supremacists might be using the internet, but they don't want to be a part of globalization. I think they want to be a part of globalization because the white supremacists want to link across nations, right? There's a there is a global movement of people right now who want to say we want to connect with the white Americans in France, with the whites in Italy, with the whites in France and Germany and all of that, to create one global system where we will fight back against this horde of people who want to flood our nations, right? This is why in every modern Western developed nation state right now, they have a virulent anti-immigrant movement. There are a bunch of people where they're saying, let's kick out the immigrants, let's let them drown in the Mediterranean, let's build the wall and that sort of stuff. It's not a coincidence right now that you have Marine Le Pen, uh, um, the oh God, what was the woman's name in Italy? Donald Trump, uh, um, the guy in the Netherlands, Wilders, or something like that. Uh, Orban in Hungary. So many people right now across the world are on this anti-immigrant wave, right? It's not a coincidence, right? It's a part of that. It's a part of that. There is a pan movement right now to unify the people who are a part of this right wing reactionary and frankly white supremacist way of thinking. Continuing here in the text, though, this is just me interpreting what we are reading. Though, this is the final chapter for today. Then we're gonna wrap it up. Go to the gym. Have a good ass day. Yeah, let's continue here. Considering the global perspective, however, highlights a number of problems with Castell's analysis of online white supremacy. First, he misinterprets the Patriot movement to be the umbrella organization under which all other white supremacist groups meet. He says the militia are the most militant and organized wing of a much broader, self proclaimed quote unquote Patriot movement, whose ideological galaxy encompasses established extreme conservative organizations, such as the John Birch Society, a whole array of traditional white supremacist, neo Nazi, and anti Semitic groups, including the KKK and the Posse Comitatus, fanatical religious groups such as Christian Identity, and an anti-Semitic sect emanating from Victorian England's British Israelism. Anti-federal groups such as the Counties Rights Movements, Wise Use, and Anti-Environmental Coalition, the National Taxpayers Union, and the defenders of common law courts. The Patriots Galaxy also extends in loose forms to the powerful Christian Coalition, as well as to a number of militant right to life groups, and counts on the sympathy of many members of the National Rifle Association and pro gun advocates. I would argue that all of those organizations are very powerful in maintaining the system of white supremacy, but it's not the only systems out there. It's not the only organizations. It's not the only way to unify people around that same cause, right? There are also the lone wolves out there. Um, While the Patriot movement in the 1990s was certainly an important force upon the American plane for white supremacists, it did not then and does not now represent the epicenter of the ideological galaxy of white supremacist organizations listed above. Rather, the Patriot movement is and always has been a single element, an increasingly significant one at that, of the broader white supremacist movement. Indeed, at the SPLC Indeed, as the SPLC reports, the Patriot movement is currently in free fall, suffering dramatically declining participation. According to the SPLC, at its peak in 1996, the Patriot movement was comprised of 858 groups, yet by 2001, the number had declined by almost 82% to a mere 158 identified groups. Even that number, characterized by the SPLC as anemic, was perhaps inflated. While the Patriot and militia branches declined, other offshoots of white supremacy grew. As of the SPLC Spring Report of 2008, there were an estimated 888 groups in the United States, up 48% since 2000. Essentially, Castells mistook a dying limb of white supremacy to be the movement's heart. This first mistake in analysis begets another, for by making the Patriot movement his index case study on which his entire understanding of white supremacy is based, Castells erroneously locates the movement as an exclusively US based phenomenon, which it is not. So basically, what she is saying here is like, this guy is pointing at this certain movement. It's like saying MAGA. Once MAGA ends, white supremacy would end, right? This guy is only looking at the Patriot movement, right? These people in disparate states who were organizing in militias out in the woods, shooting their guns and stuff like that. This guy was saying, once this movement dies, or once movements like this fade away, white supremacy might fade away as well. But that's not true, right? Like that's that's just ridiculous to think that. That's once again this thinking that young people, a new generation, will finally solve the issue of racism. No, we have to solve the issue of racism in our generation. All right, so on the contrary, in the information age, white supremacy is global and quite self consciously so. Don Black, a white supremacist based in South Florida, established one of the earliest white supremacist websites, stormfront.org, in 1995. Stormfront's tagline from the beginning has been White Pride Worldwide, a motto that speaks to the global vision of the site's creators as well as to the current reach of the site. For some time, Stormfront has featured discussion rooms where supporters from across the globe connect, logging in from Australia, the Baltics, Belgium, Britain, Canada, France, Germany, Hungary, Italy, the Netherlands, South Africa, and Switzerland. As valuable a resource as the Southern Poverty Law Center is, its data about white supremacy in the global era are of limited value, since they restrict their scope to activity within the United States. Sources outside the United States, such as the French anti-racist group J'accuse, estimate that there may be as many as 60,000 racist websites worldwide, much higher than the SPLC's calculation of just under 900 sites based in the United States. The disparity can be explained in part by the French organization's global focus. It is admittedly difficult for various methodological reasons to accurately estimate the number of white supremacist organizations or their individual supporters. Yet Castells forces an error by culling the primary data, in this case exclusively from US based sources like SPLC and Stern's Force Upon the Plane. A curious choice in any case, given that his book is about globalization. White supremacy is a worldwide concern in the information age, not merely an American scourge. I'd just like to say, if we have so many black billionaires, why don't we start buying these racist domains, racist websites and stuff like that? Like nothing would give me more joy knowing that Lil Boosie Badass owns Stormfront. So every time the bucktooth white trash in Trailer Park, Wisconsin, go online and start spewing stuff about IQs and race, Boosie Badass gets a check. That would be great. Nothing would make me happier knowing that, I don't know, Sexy Red. Every time somebody posts a racist meme on 4chan, Sexy Red gets a penny. Like we need to either take these websites offline, or black billionaires need to step in and own these things. That's what I would do. If I had a Billy, I would buy every single racist domain out there. You want to go to nigger.com, you got to pay Simon Hill the server fees, right? You get what I'm saying? Like that's what I would do. That's what I would do. But I'm continuing here. So, third, while Castell is quite right in his assessment that identity is people's source for meaning and experience, because he situates his understanding of white supremacy by region rather than race, he overlooks the internet's importance in forming a global white identity that transcends local and regional ties. For instance, following a lengthy discussion of militias, Castell shifts to the role of the internet. For conspiracy enthusiasts like militia members, unverified statements from cyberspace reaffirmed their set conclusions by providing an endless stream of additional quote unquote evidence. Also, the frontier spirit characteristic of the internet fits well with the freemen, expressing themselves and making their statement without mediation of government control. More importantly, the network structure of the internet reproduces exactly the autonomous, spontaneous networking of militia groups and of the patriots at large, with boundaries and without definite plans, but sharing a purpose, a feeling, and most of all, an enemy. It's mainly on the internet, backed up by facts and direct mailing, that the movement thrives and organizes itself. Castells is mostly correct here in terms of the linkages the internet provides to social movement members, but he neglects an analysis of race, or more specifically, of whiteness and white identity, and the way they are central to those linkages. To be fair, when The Power of Identity was written in the late 1990s, thinking in terms of linkages characterized popular understanding of the internet. Since that time, however, a new field of scholarship has emerged that in great part draws on or influenced by sociologist Sherry Turkle's Life on the Screen, Identity in the Age of the Internet. This new interdisciplinary field examines the formation and reaffirmation of social identities online, particularly tracing links of forged particularly tracing links forged by race and at racially dedicated social networking sites. This entire area of scholarship is unaccounted for by Castells or anyone who orients their understanding of white supremacy on region to the exclusion of race. Hence, Castells has no way to envision global white identity developing online. Very, very interesting here. When just reading this, it just made me think of Black Twitter, right? Like Black Twitter is sort of like a way for people to like affirm their black identity online, because we laugh at the memes. They say, "Hey, did anybody else eat, I don't know, sweet potatoes with cabbage on top?" You get what I'm saying? And you got somebody with a fork with their eyes bucking like this, and you just feel like that sense of relatability. Hey, anybody ever clean their J's with a toothbrush and Trident? You get what I'm saying? Like there's so much that we do online that is related towards affirming our identities in the real world, if that makes sense, right? You want to be on Black Twitter if you're a black person, because you want to have that community and that bond and that sort of stuff. So very interesting that Castells had his view about the interlocking of people online. The internet is sort of like this wild west place where people would be free and away from government control, and that's of course like what patriots and militia members, kind of want. And so, yeah, the thing with the internet though is that white supremacy or whiteness in and of itself is a amorphous thing. It can change, it can evolve over time, and so. Yeah, it's not just going to always be concentrated in the militia movement. It then became QAnon. It then became, MAGA. Once it was the Tea Party. Then in the future it will be something else. Like these things are always changing. All right. Continuing here. So, global white identity, which sociologist Les Bach has referred to as translocal whiteness, is crucial to understanding cyber racism in the information age. Writing about the racially motivated menacing of an Aboriginal community in Sydney, Australia, Suvendrini Pereira illuminates the internet's development of the phenomenon. The appearance of the quote unquote race mixing posters was clearly designed to terrorize the long-standing and highly visible Aboriginal community in the area, as well as to target other racial minorities and people of color in the vicinity, notably international students at the nearby universities and English language colleges. The originating point for the poster was the website of the White Pride Coalition, from where it could be downloaded along with a variety of other racist literature, images, and regalia. The availability of the materials on the website allows their owners to disclaim responsibility for their dissemination and public display on the street. It also enables individuals of or small cells of people to act alone and in anonymity while drawing on the resources of a global white racist cyberculture. In Pereira's account, a self consciously white defined group avails itself of racist materials courtesy of a white supremacist website, part of a global white racist cyberculture to torment non white community members. In the information age, the internet facilitates the formation of a transnational, explicitly racist white identity as it has expedited the establishment of other transnational subcultural identities, queer identities, for instance. One of the key differences between these groups is that the formation of white racist identity portends terror for any outside that group, while the formation of queer identity often means terror for those inside that group. Let's keep it real. Let's keep it real. If you put up a swastika as your, you know, avatar online, you mean to strike fear into other people. And most likely you're going to be posting things that are going to be harassing towards other people. And I've experienced this myself. I've had literal people posting swastikas in my comment section, right? Saying they'll do all sorts of things to me. The thing is, if you're there are several identities you can pick up online. Like you could be a part of Black Twitter and just be posting funny memes with SpongeBob or whatever, or you could be a part of racist white right wing Twitter, which is a lot, and post Pepe the Frogs and statistics about how the Jews really owned Black people as slaves, and Black people have lower intelligence and were more prone to violence, and 13% of the population, all that sort of stuff, right? The thing is, the globalization is sort of bringing the world together, but it also is in some ways tearing the world apart, because there are some people who are using this to connect with other people, learn, build, grow, and develop. And then there are other people using globalization to go deeper into their tribes, deeper into wicked parts of a subculture, and just be that way, rather stay 10 toes down in ignorance rather than grow their minds. All right, I'll continue here. All right. The point here is that translocal whiteness is a racial identity shaped by global information flows. Yet Castell's race and ethnicity are territorial identities, i.e., religious, national, ethnic, territorial. By orienting racial and ethnic identity with a specific region, nation, or territory, Castell's analysis fails to account for the digital diasporas. That is, the way online communities shape racial and ethnic identities constructed at the intersection of technologies and globalization. More to the point, Castell's analysis fails to account for the internet's pivotal role in the formation of global white identities. Castells further undermines his analysis by asserting that race, in addition to being tied to regional or territorial boundaries, is also configured as a demographic characteristic. For instance, he writes that there is one clearly predominant characteristic in the patriot movement. In a large majority, they are white heterosexual males. Castells dilutes the importance of racial identity, systemic racism, and the white racial frame when he categorizes race as merely one of many demographic characteristics rather than as a fundamental organizing principle of the movement. While he goes on to acknowledge that the angry white male theme does connect with much older rejection of racial equality by white supremacist groups, his analysis concludes prematurely. Instead, he argues that rather, they, fundamentally, a cultural and political movement, defender of the traditions of the country against cosmopolitan values. Right wing populism is hardly a novelty in the United States. Indeed, it is a phenomenon that has played an important role in American politics throughout the country's history. Furthermore, angry and popular reactions to economic distress have occurred in both America and Europe in different forms, from classic fascism and Nazism to the xenophobic and ultra nationalist movements of recent years. Boy, she was telling the future. It sounds like it was written yesterday. Anyway, one of the conditions that can help explain the fast spread of the militia, besides the internet, is growing economic hardship and social inequality in America. Men's average income has deteriorated substantially in the past 2 decades, particularly during the 1980s. That's the thing. When you see all these guys losing their jobs, that's when you see the red pill content start going up. That's when it starts going up. Andrew Tate makes $1 billion every time 10,000 boys lose a job or don't get a job. Anyway, once again, Castells limits his examination of white supremacy by focusing on geography, in this instance, the United States, and then trying these movements to other forms of quote unquote right wing populism formed in response to economic distress. Such class based analysis is drawn from the classic Marxist view in which race is epiphenomenal. While Castells, a neo-Marxist, is careful in other sections of the chapter to not overinterpret the patriot movement with the language of class, he does not offer anything that might be considered a robust racial analysis. Indeed, as the passage immediately above illustrates, race is missing from his analysis, and the lack of something is as critical as a thorough racial analysis substantially weakens Castell's overall argument, as becomes evident in the passage immediately following, when he asserts that economic inequality cultivated militias in the American West. For instance, Montana, the seedbed of the new militia, is also one of the favorite destinations of the new billionaires, fond of acquiring thousands of acres of pristine land to build ranches from which to run their global networks. Ranchers in the area resented these moves. Perhaps Ted Turner and other billionaires grabbing up land in Montana have fomented resentment among some ranchers in the area, but this geographically specific example hardly seems adequate to the task of understanding white supremacy and globalization as a whole in the information age. Castell concludes with the following: the social movements I have analyzed in this chapter are very different, and yet under different forms, reflecting their diverse social and cultural roots. They all challenge the current process of globalization on behalf of their constructed identities, in some instances claiming to represent the interest of the country or of humankind as well. Emphasis added. By drawing parallel between the Japanese Aum Shinrikyo cult and the white patriot movement, Castells asserts that reactive movements respond negatively to globalization, but he fails to explain the internet's role in the identity formation of those individuals within these groups and demotes the internet to a mechanism for providing linkages. Castells is to be commended for his far-sighted sociological vision in recognizing the importance of the coinciding trends of globalization and the internet for the transformation of social, economic, and cultural life. Yet the analysis he puts forward in Power of Identity, Volume 2, fails to adequately analyze white supremacy online in the global information age. First of all, he mistakenly takes the Patriot movement as the ideal type for all other white supremacist organizations. He then uses the Patriot movement as his index case study and thus erroneously locates white supremacy as a US only movement when in fact it is global. This focus on the Patriot movement leads to a second error that emphasizes region rather than on race as the fundamental organizing category of the white supremacist movement. Thus, Castells misses the extent to which the internet figures in the formation of a global white identity that transcends local and regional ties. And finally, by adopting race as one of many demographic quote unquote characteristics rather than a fundamental organizing frame, Castells misses the importance of racial identity, systematic racism, and the white racial frame for understanding white supremacy online. White supremacy online in the global formation era facilitates the formation of a translocal white identity, which is in turn shaped through global information technologies rather than in opposition to them. Here it is useful to return to Benjamin Barber's conceptualization of jihad versus McWorld. Rather than Castell's oppositional notion of globalization versus identity, Barber, despite the somewhat misleading title of his book, articulates a slightly more nuanced dialectical view in which jihad is enacted via McWorld. That is, in Barber's view, racial, ethnic, and religious identities are constructed and affirmed through various mechanisms of globalization. This is relevant to this discussion of white supremacy online, as whiteness is constructed and affirmed through global information flows and in racially dedicated online communities committed to white pride worldwide, such as stormfront.org. This leads to my next point of examination, namely whether this kind of online activism endangers democratic society. Just to summarize what I'm thinking here, I have not read Castell's work. This is the very first book that I've read in a long time, honestly, because I didn't find time to read, but I'm making time to read by including it in my live streaming activities. But I haven't read Castell's work, but by understanding Castell's work through Jesse Daniels' words, basically what I'm seeing here is like um, a leftist white man who means well, but ended up coming up with a half-baked discussion about race because he didn't want to actually grapple with white supremacy and what race means in the new day and age. Race is a social construct, so therefore it will always change and evolve, just like our understandings on gender or any other social construct that we have. So yeah, I just can't help but think of all the posts that I've seen on 4chan and on Twitter from white supremacists talking amongst themselves, talking about they're not whites or I'm not white enough, or uh, you know, these X groups of Europeans are white, but the other ones are not, right? Like, I can't help but think about that. But that goes to show that race is not something that's only localized, right? Our understanding of race in America is not the only understanding. It's a global phenomenon that's constantly evolving and changing right now as we speak, right? So, continuing here. Mm. A threat to democracy, white supremacist social movement activism, and the internet in a global context. When it comes to political mobilization, the internet undisputably amplifies many messages, values, and ideas. People interested in the same ideas can easily connect using the internet, and as such, the internet amplifies those connections and strengthens networks of like minded people. The the neologism cyberactivism the neologism cyber activism refers to the proliferation of social movement organizations that avail themselves of internet technologies to further their goals, which often include promoting a more inclusive, democratic society. Much of the scholarship about new social movements on the internet is guided by a conviction in the liberatory potential of the internet to transform society in more democratically inclusive ways, and therefore it tends to focus on progressive movements. For example, a good deal has been written about the Zapatistas uprising, anti war activism, and feminist organizing. New digital media like blogs and wikis and mobile computing technology like SMS have made formerly obscure activist subcultures accessible to more people and have created new inroads to political participation for those interested. For activists and extremist white supremacist organizations, like others in obscure subcultures, the internet provides a relatively inexpensive venue for widespread communication of their ideas, unimpeded by monitors or wardens. Whether or not this wider availability of white supremacy online politically mobilizes the movement remains to be seen. I think we saw it on January 6th. Uh, Jeffrey Kaplan and his colleagues are among those who have taken up this question, and I believe their assessment comes close to offering an answer. Internet or no internet, barring some cataclysmic development, war, and similar organizations currently seeking to take advantage of the new technology are unlikely to become serious political contestants. Nevertheless, the internet does furnish them with a link, a way of circumventing the gatekeepers of the other channels of mass communication. A serious consequence of participatory media is in its accessibility to specialist and non specialist users alike. And the very openness of the system invites anyone with a nefarious agenda to join in and author their own suspect content. It is key here that we parse the actual harm from the potential. I agree with Kaplan and his colleagues that the likelihood of a white supremacist organization emerging as a serious political contender is remote. um, However, the issue of communicating without gatekeepers is significant for the epistemology of white supremacy online, and a topic to which I will return to in subsequent chapters. For the moment, let me continue to address why the larger political mobilization of white supremacists remains a distant but nevertheless troubling possibility. In order to affect change, social movement organizations must mobilize resources, such as attracting financial backing, garnering media coverage, establishing organizational structures, and forming political alliances with those in power. The internet is an important new tool because it increases the speed at which resources can be marshaled and then utilized to achieve the movement's goals. Adopting a resource mobilization framework, Noriko Hara and Zilia Estrada compared Stormfront.org's use of the web with that of MoveOn.org, a website with a liberal to progressive political agenda. They found that while there are some similarities between these two websites in terms of attempts at political mobilization, they are not equally effective. MoveOn.org is more popular and more effective than Stormfront.org for a variety of reasons. For example, Hera and Estrada point to the use of other media, such as print journalism and network news, to drive traffic to the websites and garner support for the respective movements. Both Stormfront.org and MoveOn.org have been featured in mainstream media reports, yet MoveOn.org has been much more aggressive in seeking out this media attention. And Hara and Estrada argue it is this strategy rather than content alone that has enabled MoveOn to sustain the broad-based political mobilization that has eluded Stormfront. The broader appeal of MoveOn.org is born out of using additional data. So here's the data right here. I will not be looking at the data just like the notes. You can pause the screen if you would like to look at it and read it, but I will continue here because we're trying to get through this chapter. So, a comparison of the web traffic to the two sites confirms Hera and Estrada's analysis that MoveOn.org has broader appeal than Stormfront.org. As alarming as the web traffic at Stormfront is, the fact that MoveOn remains consistently more popular than Stormfront should be heartening for those committed to democratic ideals. However, the fact that there are many people sufficiently interested in white supremacy to register as Stormfront should give those interested in social at the patriot movement and said, white supremacy is sort of like relegated to like these few organizations, these few rednecks, this white trash out in the sticks shooting their guns in the air, right, pretending they're going to overthrow the government. If we only base how big white supremacy is online by how many people go to Stormfront, we're looking at the same wrong metrics, right? We need to be looking at how the internet is in totality. We should be talking to black voices. We should be talking to black creators and share their experiences about receiving hate mail online and death threats online, right? Continuing here, online recruitment, distinguishing between a registered user and a member of a social movement. In a typical 24-hour period, there were 129,717 registered users online at Stormfront. A number of writers have asserted that the internet is a potential site for recruiting people to white supremacist groups. However, these claims are largely unsupported by empirical evidence. Instead, recruitment rhetoric plays on collective fears about the internet, and particularly fears about children's online activities. For example, in an article for the Psychiatric News, Lynn Lamberg writes that hate websites aggressively pursue impressionable children and teenagers, compounding one apprehension with another. The author adds that surveys show parents worry most about children's access to internet sex sites and that many parents know little about hate websites. So parents are more concerned about their children accessing porn than accessing Stormfront. Both are pretty bad, but I would be more concerned. Honestly, white parents should be more concerned about little Jimmy going to Stormfront than Pornhub. Because if little Jimmy goes to Pornhub, you know, it's less likely that he's going to be, Peyton Gentrin walking into the Walmart and killing 10 black people. He might actually learn some stroke. He might actually learn that, oh, wow, he's gay and he doesn't have to suppress his gayness inside of him and then become hateful and resentful towards the world or something like that. You get what I'm saying? Little Timmy should be on the hub rather than on Stormfront. I'll stand on that. I'll debate anybody on that. Much better for kids to. I'm not going to say that. I'm not going to say that, but you get what I mean. I'm not implying that kids should go. I'm saying what's better. Like if you had to choose, go on the hub rather than Stormfront. Like that's much worse. Anyway, continuing here. Articles such as this suggest that recruitment into organized white supremacy functions like a virus, infecting vulnerable young people through brief but deleterious encounters. Given these concerns, what are we to make of the 129,000 plus people logged in at Stormfront? Are some members and others recruits? Or does some of this online involvement mean something else entirely for online social movements? My exploration of these questions and the issue of recruitment into white supremacist movement organizations via the internet builds on Abby Ferber's insights in her book homegrown hate, that taking into account the web, it may be time to rethink what constitutes a social movement. In the following, I examine the empirical evidence of online white supremacist recruitment and draw a distinction between varying types of participation in these groups, for which I suggest an analytic framework for different types of web participation. Avery said, Ayo, I don't know exactly what you say Ayo for. Listen, I want to make that very clear. I am not saying that, little Timmy, I only said little Timmy. Little Timmy could be 18, whatever. I'm just saying, if you're a parent, you should be mindful of your kids accessing white supremacist or racist content online. That is a big deal. These little boys, especially these young white boys, are getting turned out off 4chan and then going up in mosques, going up in churches, going up in supermarkets, slaughtering the whole gang. You get what I'm saying? So if you had to choose, this is the thing. If I'm asking you, if you were white, or if you are white, what would you rather choose? Would you rather choose your son or daughter accidentally, let's just say accidentally ends up on the hub, or that your son or daughter accidentally is on Stormfront? You get what I'm saying? It's more likely it's more likely that your son or daughter will turn out pretty normal if they end up on the hub rather than a regular peruser of Stormfront. I want to make that absolutely clear. I don't want anybody saying, "Oh, Simon's out here like the diddler." No, no, no. That is not. I'm not trying to promote that. No, of course, kids should not be exposed to pornography. That is not the point I'm trying to get at here. All right. So nobody put that jacket on me. Don't put that jacket on me. All right. Anyway, continuing here. I'm continuing here. So little data exists to support the claim that the internet is an effective recruitment tool. The handful of research studies that do empirically question whether and precisely how white supremacists recruit young people online are inconclusive. For instance, in their valuable study of the effects that hate sites, quote unquote, persuasive storytelling have on adolescents, Alyssa Lee and Laura Leitz found that adolescents who were infrequently exposed to explicit hate messages suffered only minimal effects. By design, their research neither followed adolescents repeatedly exposed to such messages nor examined how adolescents might be exposed in the first place. What the Lee and Leitz study does show is that recruitment is a complex social process. So basically, what they're trying to say is, and this is actually good to hear, when kids are sometimes exposed to white supremacist, racist content online, they don't immediately fall in. Minimal effects. Minimal effects. All right. If that study is true, that's actually very positive, right? The last thing I would want to hear is like a kid see a meme of a black man next to a monkey, and then they say, "Oh, yep, that's exactly what I'm going to think now for the rest of my life." That would be horrible, and I'm glad that's not the case. All right. Anyway, continuing here. Traditional social movement organizations formed before the internet consist of a formal organizational structure of leaders and members. Think of labor unions, for example. New social movements are very differently organized, however, and are considered by sociologists to be less formal, consisting of loosely organized social networks of supporters rather than members, such as the Berkeley Free Speech Movement or the anti Vietnam War movements. Membership in a social movement suggests formally recognized leaders, a somewhat rigid membership status, perhaps conferred through payment of membership dues, and a formal structure within the social movement organization. Supporters, on the other hand, may never be recognized as official members, may never pay dues, and may be only marginally involved in the activities of the movement, but think of themselves as part of the movement. Thus, the social movement member has been defined by sociologists to have a narrowly constructed social identity. Right, the social movement member is basically the card carrying member of the militia. Right, so yeah, the distinction between supporters and members is significant because it relates to the peripheral involvement of many online social movements. For example, in a well grounded quantitative study of both online and offline environmental activists in the Netherlands, researchers found that online actions were more popular among those who did not take part in any traditional street actions. Researchers thus suggest that online activism may be an easy entry point for more peripheral participants participants. Whether or not peripheral online participants inevitably or eventually become supporters or more fully involved activists, and what the mechanisms of that evolution might be remain unclear. In terms of predicting offline collective action by those involved in white supremacy online, there is simply insufficient evidence to make such predictions at this time. In order to better conceptualize the meaning of 129,000 registered users at stormfront.org, I suggest the following schema for distinguishing types of web participants. First, in the broader terms, there are active and passive participants. The primary distinction I draw here is between those who create content in some form or another and those who do not, but instead only lurk. Online communities in general rather famously suffer from participation inequality, in which an estimated 90% of those in any given community do not actively add to the dialogue, but instead lurk or read without posting. Yep, that's me. I'm a professional lurker online, especially on the Kali. The Kali be having me dying. And this trend holds true at Stormfront as well. Within the broad category of passive participants, there is a whole range of possible ideological stances, and here I have designated three: passive supportive lurkers, passive curiosity seeking lurkers, and passive oppositional lurkers. What unites these types is that they are all non posting, read only participants. They are not registered users at the site and therefore are not counted as members in the website statistics. They instead appear as guests or visitors. I make no claim that there are only three types of passive lurkers, and there are, no doubt, many other types. Certain participants might, for example, move from one category to another over time. Others might find themselves curious only to strongly oppose some of the views expressed, but also ardently support others. There are merely suggestive categories rather than an exhaustive taxonomy. My point here is that none of these categories of web participants at Stormfront meet the sociological definition of a social movement member, and only one category, the passive supportive lurker, might be considered a supporter in the traditional sense. Active users comprise the second broad category. These are participants who create content from building the technological architecture, for example, creating the discussion board, to maintaining the community, for example, discussion board moderator, to creating new threads, for example, topics of discussion, or fora, for example, plural form of forum, usually an entire area of discussion threads related around a related theme, to simply posting, for example, an individual entry in response to another's thread. Within this broad category exists a range of possible ideological stances, slightly less varied than among passive participants. It follows that the active participants are more ideologically similar than passive lurkers, as the people with the energy to devote to participating in the site are likely those most supportive of the site's ideological aims. I have designed four categories: active innovators, creators, early adopters, active sustaining members, active supportive members, and active oppositional members. As previously, I do not mean to pose these as an exhaustive taxonomy, but rather a heuristic device for systemically considering web participation. The first category, active creators, innovators, early adopters, include people at Stormfront such as Don Black, the creator, David Duke, an early adopter, and Jamie Kelso, an innovator, the latter of whom is senior moderator and, according to at least one report, is chiefly responsible for Stormfront's success as an online community. The second category, active sustaining member, refers to those who, in addition to posting, donate money to the site's administrators. Some of these members also serve as moderators who guide the online discussion. The third category, active supportive members, includes those who are registered at the site, post regularly, and are generally supportive of Stormfront's ideological aims. And the fourth category, active oppositional members, includes the handful of members registered at Stormfront who do not identify as white and or are not supportive of the site's goals. Of these four categories, only the first two, shaded in table 4.1, I will not show the table, meet the sociological criteria for social movement membership. In a typical 24-hour period at Stormfront, there were 129,717 registered users online. And of those 21,000, 413, approximately 16%, were designated active users by the site administrator, meaning they had posted at least once in the last 3 months, and there were 31,631 visitors, approximately 24%. Examining Stormfront's numbers indicates that there are actually more visitors, passive participants, than supportive, registered users, active participants. While I do not diminish the significance of over 100,000 people having registered at Stormfront, I do believe we need to think more carefully about what we mean when we talk about recruitment. The term recruitment is perhaps the wrong one here because it reverses the online dynamic. The underlying issue, and the much more troubling one, is that white supremacists online may be recruiting, but that people are seeking out Stormfront and the message of white pride worldwide. This speaks to the existence of cultural, embedded, and internal white supremacy rather than to an extremist one, external to the core culture. This embedded white supremacy is part of a white racial frame. This is further reaching than an individual bigotry and reflects 4 centuries of systemic racism permeating all our major societal institutions. The U.S. Constitution, recall, was substantially crafted by white male slaveholders, such as Thomas Jefferson, whose notes on the state of Virginia discuss enslaved Africans in fiercely racist language. At Stormfront, one of the regular banner ads at the site features Thomas Jefferson and a quotation, which reads, "Nothing is more certainly written in the book of fate than these. The Negro people are to be free, nor is it less certain that the two races equally free cannot live in the same government." The fact that some 50 years after the civil rights movement, there are more than 100,000 registered users at Stormfront suggests that the message of white supremacy, far from being an anachronism, still resonates. Here again, the white racial frame is useful for understanding the white supremacist social movement online. And as individuals adopt the white racial frame, the racial foundations of the United States, such as these statements by Jefferson, get ignored because to pay attention to such passages would open up the possibility of an analysis of systemic racism. Opportunities for such analysis are forestalled by the white racial frame. Additionally, there is widespread ignorance about the history of racist oppression extant in 400 years of U.S. history. The legacy of this racial oppression includes a number of racial disparities in U.S. society, such as significant differences in poverty, educational attainment, and levels of incarceration between blacks and whites. When people who adopt the white racial frame begin to note these racial disparities and have only have that frame to draw on to interpret these disparities, they misunderstand racial and social inequalities as the result of individual inadequacy rather than the predictable result of systemic racism. I repeat, when people who adopt the white racial frame begin to note these racial disparities and have only that frame to draw on to interpret these disparities, they misunderstand racial and social inequality as the result of individual inadequacy rather than the predictable result of systemic racism. Whether one identifies a racially white or not, Machado, for example, trying to understand the inequality through the white racial frame leads down a cul-de-sac of misinterpretations. Thus, the Thomas Jefferson quotation resonates deeply within the broader white racial frame. By the way, I agree with Thomas Jefferson's fact. White people and black people cannot get along in America, and we never will until whiteness is defeated. Whiteness as a concept, whiteness as a social status, whiteness as any sort of, you know, defining characteristic in this racial hierarchy that we live in, right? That that is absolutely true. Thomas Jefferson was absolutely right. Our founding fathers were soothsayers. They were fortune tellers. They could read into the future. And yes, until we eliminate white supremacy, until we eliminate whiteness, not white people, until there is an abolition on whiteness as a concept and the white racial frame of viewing the world, yes, black people and white people in America will not be able to live together. Of course, Thomas Jefferson was absolutely right. I agree with that. So we should be working hand in tandem to defeat white supremacy in America and around the world if we do want to have a harmonious world. That's the only way. And no, it is not replacing it with black supremacy. for anybody who's thinking that or saying that or writing that or typing that. All right, continuing here. Thus, the Thomas Jefferson quotation resonates deeply within this broader white racial frame. Jefferson's expressly racist belief that two races cannot coexist under the same government confirms beliefs about persistent racial disparity for many who have adopted the white racial frame. And having the Jefferson quote as a recurring banner on Stormfront confirms for visitors that they have found a source for true yet otherwise hidden information about race. The Jefferson the Jefferson banner also sends a message that allegiance to the white race above all others is consistent with the core values of the founders of the United States. And in that they are correct. In fact, the discussion forum at stormfront.org includes a thread called Thoughts of Thomas Jefferson Regarding Blacks and features explicit statements from participants about what they see as the wisdom of the founders. For example, a participant at Stormfront using the screen name Kojak67 writes on April 11th, 2006, that he is reading a book about John Adams that includes real letters from the founding fathers as source material. Based on that reading, this participant concludes the following. Oh God, this is my first time reading an actual Stormfront post. The truth is that when our founding fathers spoke of all men being created equal, they had very certain ideas of what constituted quote unquote men. To them, blacks were more animal in nature and therefore not equal. How we have twisted the words of the Constitution is criminal. The founding fathers created the foundation of a great society with racial divisions. Who are we to say we know better? The more we pay attention to the men and the words of our nation's founders, the better off we will be. What a dumbass. Kojak is a dumbass. Kojak, would you take the medical advice of a 17th century doctor? So should we just heed the words of a bunch of rich aristocratic men who owned slaves, did not care about anybody other than rich white landowners than themselves? Should we take their words as gospel? No. What a dumbass. This is stupid. Just stupid people online. God, I hate the internet. Anyway, here Kojak 67 uses moderate sounding rhetoric and an appeal to the nation's founding ideals to make a point that runs counter to democratic ideals of equality for all. In this way, Kojak 67 shifts white supremacist rhetoric away from extremist expressions and places it within the more mundane, everyday expressions of white identity. In this passage, the two sit alongside each other, while some would argue we no longer live within an unequal system and that the values of the founders of the United States have been overthrown in favor of equality. There is a large and growing body of evidence to suggest that the values of the slave owning founders remain the core cultural values of this country. In many ways, online participants in white supremacy are responding to core American values and extending them globally by logging onto white pride worldwide, quote unquote. The confluence of global linkages facilitated by internet technologies means that through Stormfront, true believers in white pride can connect with their translocal and white identity. Those who view the world through a white racial frame may find that participating at Stormfront resonates in significant ways with the way they misunderstand the world. But this is a different dynamic than being recruited into a social movement organization. In contrast to the frightening but mostly unrealized potential of recruitment into white supremacy via the online world, actual recruitment into organized racism is a complex social process that happens primarily offline in face to face interaction. In his 7 year ethnography of white supremacist groups in the Pacific Northwest region of the United States, Blazak found that in face to face interactions, the group used red flags of strain to guide recruiting activity. Among these red flags are four main areas of strain: racial/ethnic shifts to multicultural curricula, gender, feminist, activist groups, heterosexuality, gay pride events, and economic factory layoffs. Youths, most often, although not exclusively, young white males experience cultural alienation or anomie because shifts in any of these areas make them susceptible to recruitment and targeting by white supremacist groups. As Blazak describes it, this is a years-long process that happens almost entirely offline in face-to-face social gatherings. The transformation from white boys to terrorist men also makes clear the ways gender and sexuality, and specifically heteronormative masculinity, are central to white supremacist discourse and recruitment. This kind of young white male alienation predates the advent of digital media. To locate the harm in this we need look no further than to the 168 people killed at the Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City in 1995. Timothy McVeigh, may he rest in peace. Conclusion. White supremacist social movements online are a complicated social phenomenon. First, rather than racial identity being constructed as oppositional to forces of globalization, white supremacy online in the global information era facilitates the formation of a translocal white identity. This translocal white identity, rather than being moored to extremist expressions, is often rooted in core American values and draws upon the rhetoric that self consciously aligns itself with the founding fathers, while simultaneously seeking to transcend national boundaries and exert a global reach. And this translocal white identity, as illustrated in the previous chapter about the Machado case, is one that is malleable and may expand to include individuals not considered white in other social or historical contexts. Second, the likelihood that a white supremacist organization could pose a serious political challenge in a contemporary democracy is remote, though worrisome. The more serious threat to the democratic ideal of equality has to do with the epistemological challenge to the cultural value of racial equality, rather than with political mobilization or any army of extremist white supremacists. The emergence of white supremacy online allows for the possibility of knowledge communities where those who oppose racial equality can gather and affirm for each other their shared ideas about white superiority. And within these online communities, they can engage in a self self perpetuating cycle of validating those knowledge claims. I'll read that again. And within those online communities, they can engage in a self perpetuating cycle of validating those knowledge claims. By asserting ideas in opposition to racial equality, then connecting those ideas to widely respected figures, such as Thomas Jefferson, who also opposed racial equality, white supremacists lending further legitimacy to their effort to erode the knowledge base for the idea of racial equality. Third, white supremacist social movements online cannot be adequately understood by drawing on facile and vague notions of recruitment via the internet that plays on people's fears. Instead, what it means to participate online is multidimensional and may or may not overlap with social movement membership. In this way, participation online in white supremacist forums overlaps with participation in other online forums. Some may participate actively and be true believers or passionate registers. Others may only lurk and may be supportive, non-supportive, or fall somewhere else on a rubric of possible types of online participation. In general, the relationship between the multifaceted dimension of online participation and active social movement involvement are not widely understood, and this is no less true for white supremacist social movement organizations. While the potential exists for a multinational white pride social movement that organizes across national and geographic boundaries, this potential has thus far been unrealized. I agree with Castells that social movements in the information age are mobilized around cultural values. White supremacist social movements are organized around the cultural values of whiteness, white identity, and the notion that the white race is distinct from and superior to all others. This is a value that the founders of the United States also shared. And now white supremacists, largely based in the United States, are using the internet to reach across national boundaries to unite with others who value white identity as a marker of cultural superiority. Whether or not whiteness remains a core value in the American context or merely represents the values of an oppositional subculture depends on one's standpoint and epistemology for understanding racial equality. Subjects I will address in greater detail in subsequent chapters. Next, I turn my analysis in the ways in which white supremacy is connected with gender and sexuality because these are constitutive elements of cyber racism. And that's the end of chapter 4. for our next class, lesson, session, whatever you want to call it. I hope to educate everybody here. We're going to part 3, White Supremacy Online. We will pick up tomorrow with chapter 5, and we will also read chapter 6. I believe from my last checking of this book's table of contents, there are 10 chapters. So we're already on 5, so we're making good speed, and we should be finished by Thursday. Hopefully we'll be finished by Thursday. So shout out to Nelson Moreno jumping into the chat. The left doubling down on identity politics also doesn't help. Yeah, once again, this book was written in 2009. And yeah, the creation of our identities online, or the things that we choose to talk about online, um, I believe triggers the right. The thing is, people say online, everything is getting really woke. Everything is getting too PC. Everything is becoming DEI. But they only say that whenever they see black faces in the movies or in the TV shows, or other minorities, or women on the screen and that sort of stuff, or in jobs or careers. You know what I mean? But I I think the right views identity that is non-white as a threat to its existence. Therefore, they overreact when they see it, and then they gaslight us all into thinking that everything is being changed or reversed, and it's a type of reverse racism when it's not. So I want to push back on that. The left doubling down on identity politics. What does that mean? Let's give an example, because I can give plenty of examples of the right and white supremacists and people who are sympathetic to their cause doubling down on their identity. Right? They double down on their identity by literally murdering people. You find me the leftist who walked into a KKK rally and just started slaughtering people, and I will shut up forever. I will delete my channel. You find me the person who tried to, go to the Proud Boys rally and basically shoot up the whole place. Yeah, I'll start talking about white supremacy and racism forever. You get what I'm saying? But Avery Adams says, W, thank you, Simon. You're welcome, everybody. You can get this book on Amazon for only the cheap price of $48.62. I got this book, and if anybody wants a copy, buy it. No, but if you really want to find out how to get some good books online, just holla at me. I got the plug. I got the plug on books. You know what I mean? You got your homie Simon from the block, got the plug on books. You heard me? Other people selling you stuff that's going to lower your mind. I'm trying to elevate your consciousness around here, big boy, playboy. The world is yours. Pick up Jesse Daniels' book, Cyber Racism. I'm going to read this last comment from Nelson Moreno, then I'm going to dip. So it means that the left keeps keeping up false ideas such as race and encouraging groupthink. Well, oh, that's a big topic. I'm tired as hell, Nelson. Nelson, I'm too goddamn tired to get into that. We all acknowledge that race is a social construct. We all acknowledge race is not real. Me and a white man are literally the same species. We are the same species of people. We are the same people. We acknowledge race is a social construct, but I cannot just act like my race does not matter when I walk outside. I cannot just, walk into the store with my hoodie up, sagging my pants, and thinking everything is okay. Right? Because I know I'm going to be treated differently than that white boy who has his hoodie up and he's sagging his pants. Right? I can't just pretend like me having long dreadlocks or something like that. I can't just pretend like me having long dreadlocks and stuff like that, walking into certain job interviews like I'm going to get the same treatment. You get what I'm saying? Uh, oh man, the feds, where you at? Exactly. I don't know if you're laughing because I said I'll walk into the store with the hoodie on or whatever, or are you talking about the feds like I'm gonna call the internet police? All right, Nelson. No, liberals believe in race very much, including the traits that allegedly come with race. I don't believe in that. No, no. No true leftist actually believes anything inherently different about the races of people. That's only the right. I want to make this absolutely clear. I, Simon Hill, do not believe that any sort of race of people have any inherent characteristics that make them different than others. No, no. No true leftist, no true Marxist, socialist, communist, just basic liberal believes that. Nobody believes that. That's only the right. And if you tend to believe, okay, Asian people are like this, Pakistanis are like this, Nigerians are like this, or black people are like this, that's on you. Don't put that on the left. Nobody on the left is saying that, in my opinion. I have never heard that. Never. All right. And with that being said, I will see y'all tomorrow for chapters 5 and 6 of cyber racism, and send me some books. All right. All right. Y'all be easy. Peace.